Wealthy tycoon defies black judge. What she does next shakes the courtroom. The courtroom hummed with hushed murmurs. An undercurrent of tension thickened the air. Every seat was occupied, spectators crammed shoulder to shoulder, their gazes fixed on the defendant's table. For weeks, the name James Carter had flooded the headlines. And now, at last, he was here. A towering figure with broad shoulders, he moved with an air of untouchable confidence, clad in a suit that likely cost more than most earned in a year. His entrance was slow, deliberate, a smirk playing on his lips, his slicked-back hair catching the sterile glow of the overhead lights. It wasn't just a smile, it was a statement. I own this place. But to everyone else, it felt more like explain to their children why they had to pack up and leave, why their dreams of college or a stable future had crumbled overnight. James Carter wasn't just wealthy. He was the kind of rich that operated above consequences, or so he thought. With yachts, sprawling mansions on both coasts, and a fleet of private jets, he lived a life most could only imagine. His company, Carter Investments, had once been hailed as the pinnacle of financial genius, a beacon of opportunity. But beneath the polished facade, behind the promises of wealth and security, lay a cold-blooded scheme. He thrived on trust, on the desperate hopes of families who believed his words. He convinced them to pour everything they had into his empire. Retirement savings, college funds, life inheritances, only for it all to vanish. By the time the truth surfaced, the damage was irreversible. Bank accounts were drained, homes were seized, and parents were left to face tearful children, forced to utter words they never thought they'd have to say. We lost everything. Waved him off dismissively, his smirk unwavering. The blatant disrespect sent a ripple through the courtroom. Gasps, exchanged glances, a tension that thickened the air. Judge Eleanor Kim, however, remained composed. She settled into her chair, her sharp eyes locking onto James Carter like a hawk assessing its prey. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice steady but firm, "I don't believe you heard the bailiff. In my courtroom, when I enter, you stand." James barely spared her a glance. He tapped his pen against the notepad, exhaling as if this were a minor inconvenience. "No disrespect, Your Honor," he drawled, "but I prefer to remain seated. I have a bad back." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Judge Kim didn't flinch. She studied him for a beat longer before leaning forward slightly. "Your back seems to work just fine when you're walking into this courtroom," she noted. "But if it's truly an issue, I have no problem ordering a medical evaluation before we proceed. Of course, that would mean a delay, perhaps even a few days in holding, until we confirm your condition." James stiffened. The smirk faltered just slightly, and for the first time since entering the courtroom, he hesitated. His lawyer subtly elbowed him. Slowly, begrudgingly, James Carter pushed himself to his feet. "That's what I thought," Judge Kim said coolly. "Now let's begin." Judge Kim maintained her composed demeanor, but the weight of James Carter's arrogance did not go unnoticed. As the trial commenced, the full extent of his crimes came to light, each revelation landing like a hammer blow. Angela Parker, a single mother of 3, sat rigid in the front row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She had worked 2 jobs, scraping together every penny to secure a future for her children, until Carter's scheme robbed her of everything. Beside her, Tom Hayes, a retired firefighter, sat with his jaw clenched and his weathered hands gripping the armrests of his chair. He had spent decades running into burning buildings, saving lives without hesitation, but when it came to his own future, he had placed his trust in Carter Investments. Now, his pension was gone, his security shattered, and they weren't alone. The courtroom was filled with victims. Families who had lost homes, retirees who had been left with nothing, young couples whose dreams had been stolen before they could even begin. The devastation James Carter left in his wake wasn't just financial, it was personal. It was the erasure of trust, the destruction of hope. But James? He sat there, expression blank, occasionally scribbling notes as if this were just another business meeting. As witness after witness took the stand, detailing their losses, their heartbreak, their ruined lives, he barely reacted. Judge Kim, however, noticed everything, every flinch, every forced yawn, every dismissive glance. And she was waiting for the moment he realized that, for the first time in his life, he was not in control. "Tear to the ground, I didn't just lose money, I lost everything I worked for," Tom Hayes said, his voice thick with emotion. His calloused hands trembled as he gripped the witness stand. "I planned for retirement, I did everything right, and now I can't even afford my medication." The courtroom was silent, except for the quiet sniffles of those who had suffered the same fate. One after another, victims took the stand, their stories a brutal reminder of the devastation James Carter had left in his wake. An elderly couple, their hands intertwined, spoke about how they had planned to leave something behind for their grandchildren. "We wanted them to have a future," the woman whispered, her frail voice barely audible. "Now we have nothing." A young man barely out of college described how he had trusted Carter's promises, investing his inheritance, the only thing his late parents had left him. "I thought I was securing my future," he said, shaking his head. "Instead, I lost the last piece of them I had." And through it all, James Carter remained impassive. He sat back in his chair, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. If he felt guilt, remorse, anything, he didn't show it. Judge Eleanor Kim, however, was watching. Every flicker of indifference, every moment of arrogance, she noted it all. And when the last witness took their seat, she finally spoke. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice calm but firm, "you have stolen more than money. You have stolen security, dignity, trust. These people sit before you not just as victims, but as proof that your actions have real consequences." For the first time that day, James Carter met her gaze. And for the first time, he saw something that sent a flicker of doubt through his otherwise unshakable confidence. A reckoning was coming, simply smirked, as if the whole thing was nothing more than an inconvenience. The audacity of his indifference sent a fresh wave of outrage through the courtroom. Angela wiped away fresh tears, her jaw tightening. Tom exhaled sharply, his knuckles white from gripping the armrest. Judge Eleanor Kim's expression remained unreadable, but the fire in her eyes spoke volumes. She tapped a finger against the bench, letting the silence stretch, making sure the weight of the evidence settled on every person in the room. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice steady but carrying an undeniable edge, "do you have anything to say for yourself?" James barely looked up from his phone. "Sounds like business," he muttered with a shrug. "People take risks. Sometimes they lose. Not my fault they made bad bets." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. A murmur of disbelief, anger, and heartbreak filled the space. Even his own lawyer stiffened beside him. Judge Kim leaned forward. "Let me be absolutely clear," she said, her tone sharpening. "You didn't just mislead investors. You orchestrated a calculated scheme built on lies and deception. You stole from hardworking people, left families homeless, wiped out retirements. And now, faced with the evidence, your response is, 'Not my fault.'" James finally lifted his gaze, that smug grin still intact. "It's just money. People will make more." The reaction was immediate. Angela let out a quiet sob. Tom shook his head in disgust. A man in the back audibly muttered, "Unbelievable." Judge Kim took a slow, measured breath, and then, with a level of control that made the moment all the more chilling, she spoke. "Bailiff," she said, her voice unwavering, "take Mr. Carter into custody. Effective immediately." James blinked, the smirk faltering for the first time. "Wait, what?" "You've already proven you have no respect for this court or the lives you've destroyed," she continued. "You are now remanded until sentencing." The courtroom erupted. Gasps, whispers, some even applauded. James shot up from his chair, his arrogance finally cracking. "You can't be serious. I have lawyers, I have—" Two officers stepped forward. "Hands behind your back, sir." For the first time, James Carter was not in control. Outrage in the room, shaking his head as if the entire trial was nothing more than an inconvenience. "Come on, Your Honor," he scoffed, leaning back in his chair. "You're acting like I robbed a bank. People lose money all the time. It's called the market." The reaction was instant. Murmurs of disbelief swept through the courtroom. Angela Parker covered her mouth, her shoulders trembling. Tom Hayes let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. Even the jury exchanged uneasy glances. Judge Kim's jaw tightened, but she remained composed. She picked up her gavel again, but this time she didn't strike. Instead, she leaned forward, her voice low and firm. "Mr. Carter," she said, her words deliberate, "this is not a boardroom, this is not a negotiation, and you are not above this court." James rolled his eyes, but before he could speak, Judge Kim continued. "Your arrogance does not shield you, your wealth does not absolve you, and your complete lack of remorse—" She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "It will cost you." For the first time, something flickered across James Carter's face. Something close to doubt. But it was too late. Judge Kim turned to the prosecution. "Proceed with sentencing recommendations," she ordered. James Carter had spent his life bending the rules, manipulating the system, and buying his way out of consequences. But today, his money couldn't save him. Her eyes burned with a quiet fury. She set her gavel down slowly, deliberately, before speaking. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice even but razor-sharp, "put your phone away. Now." James sighed dramatically, flipping his phone face down on the table, but he still didn't bother looking at Angela. Instead, he smirked, stretching back in his chair as if this was just another boring meeting he had to endure. Angela swallowed hard, gripping the paper tighter. "My kids cried themselves to sleep in the back seat of our car," she continued, her voice cracking. "They asked me when we were going home. I didn't have an answer." James let out a quiet scoff. "That was it." Judge Kim's gavel struck like a gunshot. "Mr. Carter, stand up." James hesitated, confused. "What?" "I said stand up," she repeated, her tone leaving no room for argument. He pushed his chair back slowly, rising to his full height, still wearing that infuriating smirk. "What's this about?" he drawled. Judge Kim didn't blink. "You have disrespected this court, the victims of your crimes, and now, even during their testimonies, you continue to mock this process. I will not allow it." She turned to the bailiff. "Remove Mr. Carter's phone and place him in restraints." The smirk vanished. "Wait, what?" James scoffed, looking around as if expecting someone to intervene. His lawyer started to object, but Judge Kim raised a hand, silencing him. "The defendant will remain in custody for the duration of this trial," she declared. Enough is enough. Gasps rippled through the courtroom, followed by a stunned silence. The bailiff stepped forward, pulling James's hands behind his back. For the first time since the trial began, James Carter looked shaken, and for the first time, he realized he wasn't in control anymore. Judge's patience had worn thin. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice sharp as steel, "put the phone away." James barely glanced up, lifting the device with a smirk. "It's important," he muttered. Judge Kim's gaze didn't waver. "I said now." For a second, it seemed like he might push back, but with an exaggerated sigh, he placed the phone down, as if indulging a minor inconvenience. Angela's hands clenched at the witness stand. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with disbelief. "How can you be so heartless?" she whispered. "How can you sit there and act like none of this matters?" James didn't flinch, didn't react. By the time the trial ended, though, When the cuffs clicked around his wrists, he finally understood. It mattered now, has only confirmed your complete lack of remorse. James leaned back, arms crossed, that same smug smirk still plastered on his face. He looked more like a man waiting for a dinner reservation than someone about to be sentenced. Judge Kim, however, was unfazed. She continued, her voice unwavering. You have stolen more than money. You have stolen trust, security, and the futures of countless families. And even now, you refuse to acknowledge the pain you've caused. The room was silent, the weight of her words pressing down on everyone. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicked, victims held their breath. Then, she delivered the final blow. For these crimes, I sentence you to 25 years in federal prison, without the possibility of early release. A collective gasp filled the courtroom. The smirk on James Carter's face finally wavered. Angela let out a shaky breath, gripping Tom's hand. Tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness, but from relief. Justice, at last. James opened his mouth as if to protest, but Judge Kim cut him off. Bailiff, take him away. As the handcuffs snapped around his wrists, James Carter, the man who thought he was untouchable, was finally out of time. Is not your boardroom, Mr. Carter. This is a court of law, and you are not above it. The room was electric with shock. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras flashed, and murmurs rippled through the packed gallery. James's face turned red with fury. This is outrageous. I built an empire. You can't just... Judge Kim cut him off with a single, measured look. You built that empire on lies and stolen dreams, she said, and today you answer for it. The bailiff stepped forward, securing the cuffs around James's wrists. He struggled, his arrogance crumbling with every passing second. Angela Parker, sitting in the front row, let out a shaky breath, gripping Tom Hayes's hand. For the first time in years, there was hope. As James was led away, his shouts echoing in the courtroom, Judge Kim's voice rang clear one final time. This court is adjourned. And with that, justice was served. As a man who could no longer buy his way out, the applause swelled as James was dragged through the doors, his protest drowned out by the overwhelming relief of those he had wronged. Angela wiped her tears, standing taller as she faced the cameras. We lost so much, she said, her voice steady. But today, at least, we got something back. Tom nodded beside her, his grip firm on her shoulder. It won't bring back what we lost, he added, but it proves that no one, not even the richest among us, is untouchable. Judge Kim watched from the bench, her face unreadable. There was no satisfaction in what she had done, only the weight of knowing that justice, real justice, had been served, and for the first time in his life, James Carter had no power, no control, only the consequences of his own making.